2, 1.
Here we go!
Welcome to Advisors of Influence, a podcast for growth-minded independent advisors that want to expand their influence and make a meaningful impact in the areas of life that matter most to them. Thanks for joining us, and let's jump right into today's show. Hey advisors, it's Jovan, co-founder of Advisor Internet Marketing, or AIM for short, and welcome to our very first episode of Advisors of Influence. As you may know, I launched a podcast back in January of 2016 called the Advisor Internet Marketing Podcast. But what makes this show different from anything else I've ever done is that this show has everything and nothing to do with building a financial practice. And here's what I mean. Today, there's actually a lot of decent podcasts catering to financial advisors to help them grow their practice. But what I feel is missing right now is a show that delves into topics like deepening your spirituality and faith, how to ensure that you're fit and healthy while building your business, or how to maintain healthy and flourishing relationships with your spouse, children, and friends while running a successful practice. And over the last decade, in my pursuit of building a successful business for myself, I found that I became a bit one-dimensional in my focus and recognized that there are actually other areas of life that I really want to cultivate and bring more attention to. So I've actually been thinking about launching this podcast over the last few years, but in my mind, it wasn't really the right time, but that time is right now. And so think of this show as a way for me to document my own personal journey. Think of it as a buffet of ideas to help you in your own pursuit of living life to its fullest. In today's show, I'll be interviewing Cody Foster. And Cody Foster is the co-founder of Advisors Excel, based out of Topeka, Kansas. And if you're not familiar with Advisors Excel, they're the single largest FMO or annuity wholesaler in our industry, and they specialize in helping independent financial advisors become great business owners. And so since founding Advisors Excel in 2005, they've actually grown that business from 3 founders to over 650 employees today, making them one of the largest employers in Topeka, Kansas. Cody's actually been featured in multiple publications, most notably Success Magazine. We've all heard of Darren Hardy's best-selling book, The Entrepreneur Roller Coaster, and Tony Robbins' #1 New York Times best-selling book called Money, Master the Game. Cody's also an investor and involved in real estate and other businesses and plays a critical role in the redevelopment efforts of downtown Topeka, Kansas. I actually stayed in his hotel, the Cyrus Hotel, which is a pretty swanky and cool place, when we went out to visit the Advisors Excel office. I think you guys will really enjoy today's interview, where we cover everything from leadership development to Cody interviewing a former United States president, and finally how Cody has turned a personal tragedy into a noble mission of helping people overcome mental illness and depression. We actually recorded this interview back in December of last year, which is why you'll hear me reference holidays and things like that, but I've been really looking forward to getting the show launched and ready for you to listen. And so please welcome to the show, Cody Foster. All right, so welcome, Cody. For those advisors who are listening to our show today, who is Cody Foster?
Man, that's kind of a tough question to start off with, I guess. So I guess I'll do maybe more the bio stuff, and I know you've hit a little bit of that, but have been in this kind of financial services industry now for a little over 20 years. So my first job out of college was in financial services at an insurance marketing organization called Personalized Brokerage Services. And was there for about 4 years. My partner, David, who you've met, David, too, we decided we wanted to go be advisors. So we did that for a year and realized how hard it was, I think. It looked very easy. It's part of why we wanted to do it. Thought it would be a lot of fun. We'd make all this money, have all this free time and flexibility, and then figured out really, really early on that was not how it works, that we were a small business owner who happened to do financial services. So I think throughout the course of that year, just being kind of frustrated, had this idea of like, man, if we could build an organization where we could learn from other advisors, we would get a lot better. And, collectively, everyone would get better. So started a company called Advisors Excel in 2005, February of 2005, which really we started off as insurance marketing organization, as the company's grown over the past almost 17 years now. It's kind of grown into full financial services. So broker dealer, investment advisor, Medicare and life insurance on top of like annuities also. So really serving other financial advisors. So I operate, I guess Dave and I still to this day probably operate kind of as the co-CEOs of that organization. So that's who I am from a professional standpoint. My wife and I have been married for 20 years. So we just celebrated our 20-year anniversary this past year. And I have a son who's a junior in high school and a daughter who's an eighth grader. So it's hard to believe, but like empty nest is like not too far away. As fast as time goes, it'll be here before you know it. So
Excellent. Well, first of all, thank you for being the first guest on our show here at Advisors of Influence. I really appreciate you taking the time to being here with us.
honored you
Um,
would have me.
yeah, so kind of a question out of left field potentially. So, what
Okay.
surprises people after they got to know you? What is it about you that some people might be surprised to know?
Mm. I think by the nature of our business and as much time as I have to be on stage or in front of people or connecting, I'm probably actually much more of an introvert at heart. I don't necessarily enjoy that all that much. So after work, I don't do a lot. I'm at home most of the time. So uh, I think some people would probably be just surprised about that. Um, what else? I love hip hop. I think that shocks a lot of people. So that's kind of my favorite genre of music. So a lot of people don't see that or are a little surprised by that too.
That is interesting. All right, so what music artist would you say would be the top of your list on your
I'm always
playlist?
careful on how I say this because I don't want people to judge me, right? So, and honestly, I'm a big fan as I've grown and matured. I'm actually a really big fan of Christian hip hop. So,
Okay.
a good friend of mine's a guy named Lecrae who is awesome and puts out a ton of great hip hop that also is not terrible to listen to. I guess is the best way to put it. So kind of that whole genre of Christian hip hop is probably what I would listen to the most these days.
Excellent. Well, from one introvert to another, I can certainly relate to a lot of things you said. So, I got some things we want to cover here today on the show.
Yeah.
And well, first of all, if anyone who's listening to our show today, definitely check out Cody Foster's podcast. I believe it's called The Business of Advice. It's very good. I've listened to a lot of the shows there, and in a
Thank
lot of
you.
ways, it was kind of the impetus for me to want to launch my own show here. So, a lot of advisors, we all know the pandemic has been a challenge for many advisors, and particularly
Sure.
in our industry. What I'd like to hear from you are some of the things that successful advisors, what are they doing differently to really navigate some of the challenges that we're seeing out there in the marketplace today?
Yeah, that's a great question, and got to see it, firsthand with a lot of the advisors that we support. So I'll try and hit a couple things first, and this is going to sound a little cliche probably when I say it, but it's like I've just witnessed it firsthand. Is when you go back to March of 2020, because now you can't even say 2020 anymore, really, because it's kind of carried over into 2021 and probably into 2022 also. So just when you look at the beginning of the pandemic in March, what what happened is we saw advisors who ended 2020 that were really good advisors already, and they had their best year they had ever had. And we saw some advisors who had their worst year that they had ever had, and have seen that kind of continued into 2021 also. What I would say, and this is the cliche part about it, mindset was such a huge part of navigating this pandemic. The advisors who said like, okay, let's figure it out, right? I mean, let's go figure out what's going to work and adjust and make those changes. What I think they ended up seeing is like so many people were scared and so many people needed to talk to an advisor during this period of time, that the ones who didn't kind of panic or fear or fret or say like nothing's going to work, the ones that had the right mindset of like, let's go figure it out, just ended up having incredible years. And um I think we hear that all the time, but most advisors that had great years saw opportunity like in abundance during this period of time, right? Tons of people who needed help, a lot of the established firms that weren't going to make any adjustments to help these people. So mindset was a big part of it. On the flip side, there were a lot of advisors who just, they're like, nothing that we've traditionally done is going to work in this environment. We're just going to basically shut down. And so that was a really, really big one. Maybe the biggest thing that I saw. The second thing that I would say is, and I think this is one of the best things that has come out of the pandemic, Um, Financial advisors, really specifically, especially I would say those who market pretty well, so who were already pretty good at getting new appointments in the door, probably did that at the expense of doing a great job of mining their current client base and their prospective client base. So people who had responded to something before, for opportunities there. So one of the things we talk a lot about is there's diamonds under your feet, that when you were good at generating first appointments, you weren't looking for them down there because you were out, you had activity that was bringing new people in the door. But the advisors who have thrived during this period of time, I think, have realized that, man, there's so much missed opportunity within our existing client base, right? They've inherited, they've got new money, situations have changed, and or all these people that we had met with before. Because if Jovan, think about it, even the best advisor some of the best that we would know, maybe close 60%, like if they're being really honest, so
Mhm.
40% of those people make it all the way through their sales process and don't end up doing business with them. And a lot of times we just move on to the next. I think the pandemic forced people to go back and really do a good job of nurturing their existing client base, really connecting with those people, and then actually just picking up the phone and calling, past prospective clients that didn't convert at one point in time, and just saw a lot of opportunity in there. So those would be two. I mean, I think the mindset of how you approach it's a huge, huge part of it. And then the second that I think is the big adjustment that I hope, and I think we're seeing it, is going to be something that people realize long term, is like, make sure that you're doing a great job of serving your existing clients. And make sure that you're doing a good job of constantly nurturing, those past prospective clients that you missed on.
That's really good. I really like what you said about mindset. Admittedly, I am not naturally a positive person. Really had to be intentional about cultivating that. I have some good friends and people in my circle that are naturally very optimistic. I tend to be a little bit more naturally more pessimistic. And so it's something I've had to really work
Mm.
on. What I'd love to hear from you are what are some practical strategies? I mean, you've interviewed some really well-renowned thought leaders and successful people. Are there certain ways that you either put in practice or you've heard from other successful advisors on how to actually cultivate a mindset to be able to overcome some of the adversity we're seeing out there in the world today?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting hearing you say that. I wouldn't have necessarily thought that about you. So knowing that now, I do think there are people who are probably born a little more naturally optimistic, and some that are maybe a little bit more pessimistic. And I don't know if you're born that way or conditions. I don't know what plays a role in it. My wife and I always have this joke. I always tell her, like, I'm the optimist, and that she's more of the pessimist. She describes herself as a realist more than a pessimist. She says, I just don't see the reality in situations. I only see the upside. So I mean, I think some people are naturally wired one way or the other, but these are things that you mentioned. It just, even the people I've been able to spend time around, it's not rocket science, and candidly, it's a lot of the things that we've all always heard. What, first and foremost, like, what are you feeding your mind every
Mhm.
single day?
Mhm.
One early on in the pandemic, Darren Hardy, who's a good friend of mine, I think you listened to the podcast I did with him.
Mhm.
He said there's a small group of 12 of us that have this mastermind and get together. And early on, he sent this great, I don't remember if it was a text or email, that just said, hey guys, like, more than ever, be protective of what you're letting into your mind. He's like, as leaders, there's you're going to be called on more than ever before right now. Everybody's going to be looking to you. And if you he always calls it fear porn. He's like, if you're going to sit and watch the news every night and watch
Mhm.
just this fear that is fed at you, it's going to impact your ability to lead. So he's like, more than ever before, like, guard what you're letting into your mind. So
Mhm.
the flip side of that would be like feeding your mind with positive stuff. So I think,
Mhm.
I start every morning out. To me, the most positive thing that I can feed my mind is the Bible. So I start every morning out with devotionals, like, don't miss, like, it's the first thing I do in the morning. So devotionals, I gotten a really, and I've done this before, but I did it every month during that kind of stretch of COVID, is just reading the book of Proverbs. So I would read the corresponding, like, on the first of the month, I would read Proverbs 1, on the second, Proverbs 2. There's just a lot of wisdom, I think, in that book specifically. But then not just biblical or devotional stuff. Like, I read a John Maxwell, kind of a daily leadership devotional he has. I'll read that each morning. So just being very thoughtful around that. And then, man, turning off the news and, listening to a podcast like this, or just finding stuff that you can be intentional about what you're feeding. So that would be one. I think the second, and again, things that we've all heard before, but just the people that you're spending your time around, right? And being around, if optimism is something that maybe you're not great at, trying to spend more time around people who are good at that, and putting those people in your life to balance some of that out, I think is a big part of it also. So and then I think, just generally speaking, even if someone is more pessimistic by nature, the one thing, and just from a mindset, that I would say is, we've never lived, like, by every single statistical measure pretty much created, we've never lived in a safer, more abundant time in the history of mankind. And the opportunities, like, if you just see, um, take, like, look at Elon Musk and what he's doing, right? The guy's kind of crazy, but like, he sees this huge future. And I think, if you just really understand, like, there's never been a better time to be an entrepreneur, especially if you're born in the United States. Like, the opportunities are so limitless today, probably unlike any time they've ever been before. Technology is a game changer, for everyone, just evens the playing field in so many ways. So I think, just in general, understanding that, like, there are a lot of reasons for optimism, despite a lot of the stuff that we're fed. Like, we've never had more opportunities than we have right now. But then, be careful what you're feeding your mind. And I think, second, who you're spending your time around.
That's really good. It kind of leads into the next, question I have for you. Some advisors may not realize this, but I originally got started in this industry back in 2009. And I think that's around that time is when I actually met you and your partner, David Callanan, and to see
Yeah.
the evolution of what y'all have built as an organization and as a company. And, there's a lot of different FMOs and groups out there, but one very specific thing that really struck me and continues to inspire me is how committed y'all are to personal development. And so obviously mindset is under that umbrella. And so what I
Sure.
really wanted to hear from you is, you folks are able to get some of the most incredible speakers, thought leaders, successful advisors, as well as authors, people like Tony Robbins, the list goes on and on. I would like to hear from you on what are some of the most, or maybe one or two of the most influential folks that you've had the privilege to be on your platform or interview, and what was some key takeaways from these type of relationships?
That's a really good question. And I'll back up before I answer that. People say that all the time. They're like, man, you guys really bring in a lot of great people. And um, part of that is for my own personal development. So I tell advisors, we just had an event last week and we had some great people. And I said, a huge part of that is for my own personal growth and development. So trying to model the same things that are important to me, for everyone else that we work with and support too. So kind of goes back to that, who are you spending time around, and who are you letting in your mind, who are you feeding your mind with? So, oh man, so a couple of the most influential. So I would say the most, maybe the coolest opportunity that I ever got, but I would say also maybe the most influential in a way, was President Bush. So I got a chance to, we had him at one of our big events, and I got a chance to interview him that night. It was kind of a fireside chat. And maybe a couple of things that I would say around him. He, regardless of what people thought about him as president, so, we had a big diverse group. Some people hated him, when they walked in there that night and thought he was the worst president ever. Everyone left there loving, respecting, and admiring him. So to watch the way he won over the audience, even those who may not have agreed with him, and he was funny, but he was humble. He was transparent. He was honest. He admitted things that he wished he could have gone back and done differently. So just owning up to some of those things, that he's like, hey man, this is, it. But a few of the big takeaways I took from him, and I should back up. Like, I think part of why that was so impactful, I grew up in a small town in Western Kansas. When I graduated with 27 people in my class, we had one stoplight in the town. I was the first person in my family to go to college. So, never in a million years did I think one day I would sit on stage with a president and get a chance to talk with and interview him. So that was just, for me, I think, just this, like, holy cow moment, which made it probably that much um, more inspiring to a degree. But a couple of things that I would say I took away from him that have stuck with me. He said, as a president, you can't know everything. And he's like, the ones who act like they do or try and act like they do, he's like, just think of all, just think of all the world issues going on that you would have to be an expert in. And he said, so as a president, you have to learn to hire good people around you. And then you have to trust the opinion of the people that you put around you. And he's like, sometimes that worked out really, really good for me. And sometimes that worked out really, really bad for me. But he's like, there's no way as the president, and I've even taken that to my own leadership style of like, I'm not going to be able to know everything. So I've got to hire good people and trust that we've got the right people in place to lead and make the decisions. But a second to that, I think, is he said, but even though I can't know everything and I have to trust the people and the decisions that they're making, I'm still the one who's at fault. So if I listen to my, national defense person on, what that we should invade Iraq. I'll give you a real, real example that President Bush dealt with. He's like, I take the responsibility for that decision. I don't pass the buck off and I don't blame someone else. And we've not had a lot of that in politics for the last, 6, 7, 8 years. It feels like there's been a lot of blaming other people. So I just admire someone who's like, hey, as a leader, I'm ultimately the one that's going to take responsibility for it. So I think that was a big thing that I took away from him. Is just as a leader, you trust your people, but then you take full responsibility for the ultimate decision. Second thing from him that I've always tried to keep perspective on, he's like, a lot of times we make decisions and we're judged in the moment on the decision we made. But a lot of the decisions we make, we're not going to know whether it was the right decision for, in his case, maybe 100 years from now, with some of the decisions he's making. But even as a business leader, like there's decisions we're going to make, that we people will judge us in the moment of making the decision, but we may not know for years whether we're making the right decision. So just being very intentional about when you make decisions, like not reacting immediately to, is it going exactly how you thought it was going to go or not? So that was a big takeaway. This was not a lesson, but this is maybe just something I've ever since that day. So, we've had 3 presidents since him. Hearing him talk about how presidents' perceptions can be shaped by the media, I think has just given me in both political parties, all of that, a lot of grace around just how I view and what I'll say about the people that are elected to that office. And Jovan, if we have time, I'll give you a great example. He talked about when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans. I don't know if you remember this. You may be too young to even remember this, but there was that classic picture. Someone took a picture of him circling New Orleans in the airplane, and that he couldn't even be bothered to go land on the ground and check in on the people. And I think Kanye West said, George Bush hates black people on Saturday Night Live or something after that. Here's what he said. He said, we actually talked a lot about landing. And he's like, but the decision was made anytime. He's like, you even saw it in a little tonight, but he's like, when a president lands anywhere, the amount of first responders and police and military that have to be brought together to secure those areas for me to go take a photo op down at Hurricane Katrina, we made a decision as a team. We're a lot better off letting all those people keep doing their job and try and rescue people. He's like, I could have stopped for the photo op and it would have pulled literally thousands of people out of trying to save people's lives. Yet that's not the story that was told, right? The story that was told is like, I couldn't be bothered to do it. So I've always just kept that perspective. Anytime I hear or see people talk about, what a president is or isn't doing, like, I don't know if we ever get the full story on that. So just granting some grace for those people, because that is a hard freaking job that I don't know why anyone would want. Just the things you probably see on a daily basis that would make you doubt humanity in general is a lot. So those would be big ones. I mean, I think obviously he was probably, right up there. And this past year we had John Maxwell at an event, and then I just attended a smaller leadership event with John, and he's this year, he's probably been the most impactful on me from an individual standpoint. Just someone who's still so devoted. He's 75 years old now and maybe at the top of his game. So someone who just is practices everything that they preach, who is still just constantly trying to get better. And I went to this event with him in Nashville in November, I think early November. And, he taught on stage. There was about 150 people in the room. He was the main guy doing most of the teaching, which how exhausting that can be, right? When you're up there. And then he planned these cool experiences that one night we didn't get back till like 1 a.m. He was there the whole time. First person up there the next day teaching. So just to have like that energy and excitement around what he's doing was pretty inspiring. And then the other thing I would say, being around him a few times now this year, he has an ability to make whoever is sitting in front of him feel like they're the only person in the room at the time. Like he blocks out everything else. And I'm not always great about this, but it's been one of the things I've tried to be intentional about since being around him. If you are talking to him and there's people around, like he doesn't even know those people exist. He is just so locked in on a person. And that was cool to just watch him do it, like with some other people around. But that would be, I know that was a really long answer to go through two people, but those would be two that I would say have had a huge impact on me as I kind of look back.
That's really good. There's a lot to unpack there, and I appreciate you sharing that. I do believe.
Yeah, sorry for that long ramble there.
No, it's perfect because I think there's a tendency when we have a business themed podcast or interview to just tactics and strategy, but you've hit some really good points here in terms of mindset. We're talking about grace, and I know in the world we live in today, there is potentially a shortage of that. Anything from whether it's my marriage, I'm a new father, and what you're saying in terms of grace and how that can make a big impact in the relationships that I have personally and professionally. So I really do appreciate that. I'm a huge fan of John C. Maxwell. I actually have his leadership Bible sitting here on my desk. And so it's interesting to see how some thought leaders and people who are very influential kind of like fade into the latter parts of their career. But it sounds like with John Maxwell, it's like he's in his prime and he's getting better. He's like a good fine wine aging over time.
You know what, too, Jovan? He actually cast this vision for what he sees the future of his organization being, which is like 5 times greater than it is today. So it was cool just to hear him talk about, like, he's like, I don't even think we've started to scratch the surface of the impact we're going to make. And he's saying this at 74, 75 years old, which is just, I thought that was cool. Like just not settling and constantly realizing that you can be better.
That's really good. Kind of a little segue here. I know something that you are passionate about is mental health. It's something that I have really embraced because I think to a certain degree, we all deal with ups and downs in life, but I know that as you feel comfortable sharing, there was a personal situation with respect to one of your relationships where mental health had a profound impact. So if you don't mind sharing to what you feel comfortable, maybe we can go down that route with you.
Yeah, happy to. And I'll start by saying, like, mental health hasn't been that big of an issue for me over the years. In fact, I would say, if anything, I was completely naive to how big of an issue it was. I've personally never struggled with it. I've never dealt with it. My family hasn't, so firsthand I haven't. But in March of 20, oh man, it's this year, March of 21. So this year, one of my best friends, one of our key team members here at Advisors Excel, took his life. And he was someone who had struggled with it kind of ever since I had known him, but he would kind of go through these bouts and, he'd take a little time off and then he'd come back fine. And this time he didn't, and I think there's a lot of factors that go into that, but people struggle with depression, anxiety, any of those things. I mean, the last 2 years have been awful for that. We tell people they can't be together with other people. We feed just negative headlines at them nonstop. So we're seeing, a kind of a mental health crisis right now. I think through that process, Jovan, and this is why it's, there's a passion just purely because of him and wanting to do something to honor him. But man, probably the real reason is through that process of being pretty open and transparent and trying to lead our team through that, crisis, for lack of a better terms. I was blown away by how many people deal with it. So I think because I was a pretty open and vulnerable and transparent, people felt very comfortable sharing with me. And like, I would have guessed a few people dealt with it. Like, it's 20 to 25% of our workforce. And then just people in the community that would reach out to me. And there was actually a cool story that came, I guess, as cool as it can be, that came out of this. But at Josh's funeral, one of our employees here, her husband went with her to the funeral to support her, and realized, like, in that moment, like, he was on the same path, and it's like he's went out and got help, and it's, literally, he would tell you it saved his life. So it's probably more the realization of how big of an issue it is. I was just blind and naive to it to a degree, and now my eyes have been open. And I think sometimes when you're sometimes there's certain things that you see, and once you see them, you can't unsee them. So then you decide you're going to try and do something about it. So I think I've just seen how big of a need that it is, how poorly we treat it here in the US. It's astonishing how bad of a job that we do helping people who have this, how much lack of resources there are available for it. But then, and this is one of the things that I think is getting a little bit better, and I hope we can really push forward in a big way. It's just how we even talk about it and think about it. And one of the things I've said is, like, what I've realized is Josh, Josh, Josh had a disease that if it were cancer, we wouldn't feel ashamed or worried or scared to talk about it. Like, he would say, like, I had cancer a couple summers ago, right? I had melanoma. It's like, tell people about it. I don't think twice about it, but people are so afraid to talk about mental health when really it's, a disease like any other disease. And we know that now too, right? That it's very specifically a disease. So I want to do some things. I'm working on some things, I guess, behind the scenes for now. They'll probably be more public in the future, about just how do we change the way that we talk about, support, treat people with mental health. And I mean, the one thing I would say, even I like talking about it in a way, just because I want something good to come from this. If people do struggle with that, like, have them message me. Like, I've found a few great resources, even a couple advisors that we have that have struggled with it. Man, I've connected them with a guy who's just done some incredible work in helping them kind of reprogram their mind. And I think the more that we talk about it, the more commonplace it's going to become. I'll never forget hearing Jim Valvano's. It's just top of mind because I've seen it on ESPN a bunch lately. It's kind of Jimmy V, and they're doing their big fundraiser for the V Foundation coming up. But I remember seeing a video of his daughter talking about, back to his famous speech when he said, "I'm going to start this foundation. We're going to raise money for cancer research." His daughter ended up having breast cancer and survived. And, the chances of surviving breast cancer today are like 95%, making that it's 90+%. When he gave that speech, the chances of surviving were like 5%. So as more awareness was raised around it, and more funding came in to research it, man, I'm not saying we've wiped it off the face of the earth. You can still die, but like, your odds have so dramatically improved. I think that's a bit of where we're at with mental health, is like, the more we can talk about it and make it common and not a weird thing to talk about, I think the better we're going to do at finding cures and ways to treat it. So it's become a bit of a passion project, I guess, around that.
I'm really glad that you were willing to share that. I mean, that's something that's near and dear to me as well. I had a personal mentor of mine years ago that took his life, and it had a real impact on me. And I think I carried some guilt and around that, and like, what could I have done to prevent it? And so, it, to a certain degree, growing up, I can go down memory lane here. Growing up around in
Yeah.
church circles, it was kind of frowned upon to talk about it, because if you're feeling down or depressed, just pray your way out of it, count your blessings, sing some hymns. And as I've gotten older, it's interesting to see that stigma still, at least in some of the church circles that I kind of run around in, we don't really talk openly about it. We talk about physical health, talk about spiritual health, but
Yep.
mental health, like, it could be absolutely devastating if not addressed properly. And so, even myself and my wife, we've gone through either counseling, therapy, coaching, anything we could do to work through issues in a way. And I appreciate that maybe you may not have personally dealt with depression or anxiety to a very devastating level, but having now the empathy for people who do, I think is an amazing gift to give people who do struggle with that. So yeah, so if anyone's listened to our show here today and you're done with that, send a DM to Cody. Are you pretty active on Twitter? Is that probably one of the best places for
Yeah,
folks to
that's
connect
about
with
the
you?
only place. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
about the only one you find me on. So.
Okay, that's very good. Well, we got a few more questions as we're kind of rounding
Well,
up
and
the.
Jamal, let me say one thing real quick there,
Please.
just because it is a big
Sure.
topic. You talked about even like the church thing about like, pray about it. And we're like, you wouldn't do that if you had cancer, right?
Certainly.
You would go see a doctor. I think that's maybe the one thing I would say to anyone. And I've seen it literally transform people here. We actually, coming out of this, we hired a full-time counselor on staff. So that is available, 5 days a week and runs sessions here for our team here. And we were doing some stuff before, but just when I've seen the need and what we wanted to make it do was make it easy for them to access it, right? Because I've talked to people and they're like, well, I talked about going to see a counselor, but just never called and that. All I would encourage people, if you do battle, like call a professional. And I know there's a lot of excuses not to, but man, it would be like saying you have cancer and you're not going to go see a doctor, right? So if you're battling with it, don't try and work yourself out of it work your way out of it by yourself or pray about it or something like that. Go see someone who is trained in how to help people with these issues. It really is important. And then one other thing I would say, just specifically, if anyone who is a believer is listening to this, Louis Giglio, and you can go to YouTube and search it. Louis Giglio did this amazing sermon, and he's very vulnerable, talking about having kind of panic attacks and depression himself. But it was called "I'm Not Okay, but Jesus Is," I think is what it was. It was something like that, but just really does this great job of addressing mental health. Even from a church and biblical perspective, and like why the church has to change how we approach helping people with it. But it is just a powerful message. So I know it's called "I'm Not Okay," and then I think it is, but Jesus is, or something like that. But if you Google, Louis Giglio, "I'm Not Okay" on YouTube, you'll find it. It would be a great thing for anyone to listen to that I think would be helpful.
Excellent. I'll make sure that our team finds that link and we'll put that in the show notes for people to check out.
Oh, even
So
better. Perfect.
excellent. All right. So a few more questions here as we're rounding out the rest of the interview. Before we do that, for some advisors that may not be aware, we actually have a bigger announcement, or I should say we have a big announcement. We haven't probably publicly announced quite yet in a press release, but Advisor Internet Marketing, AIM as we call it here, is actually officially entered into a partnership with Advise Excel. And so Cody's not just kind enough to be a guest here on our show, but he's also a partner, a mentor, and a friend now. And so Cody, if you wouldn't mind, maybe just taking a couple minutes and maybe share with some of the folks here, why Advise Excel and why you chose to, basically partner and be a part of our group here.
Yeah, sure. The team is a big part, right? So you, Terry, Fernando, and everyone that's working there. I think first and foremost, anytime we look at strategic partnerships or investments, it always leads with the people that are leading the organization first and foremost, because we're not an organization that's trying to buy things and take them over. We look to invest in things that we think make some sense from some strategic partnerships and relationships. So I would say first and foremost, as you mentioned, we've known each other for a long time now, going back well over a decade, which is kind of crazy when you say it out loud. But I think that is a big one. I think second is seeing a need that you all are filling in the advisor community that not a lot of organizations are, right? And I think even the way that you support advisors is very different, and the type of advisor that you're trying to support is very different than what we're trying to support. So trying to be helpful in that. And what I mean by that is one thing that you're seeing in this industry is a lot of consolidation, right? So it's going to become harder and harder for younger organizations, I think, to have the same type of success as private equities coming in and buying up a lot of these organizations and kind of rolling them up into these conglomerates. I think one of the things that we've talked about is we really believe that independently owned and operated organizations tend to do a better job of focusing on serving the needs of the advisor and then their clients. So as Advisors Excel has grown into one of those big organizations, not private equity backed, but just on our own, have grown into where we do are able to maybe bring more resources to the table, we want to do a good job of supporting some of these independents that are really helping advisors in unique ways, and giving them the tools and the resources and access to carriers and products that may be tougher for them to get. Because I do think I've just never liked the idea when people have less choice. I think it harms the advisor. You know, if they have less choices of who they can go to, it harms the advisor, and I think ultimately it harms their clients. So just trying to create maybe a bigger playing field for groups like yourself, to really go support advisors in a bigger way, but then have the resources you need on the back end to compete with a group like us, or to compete with some of these other big, kind of conglomerates that are being kind of bought up and rolled together.
I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, our advisors have had nothing but overwhelmingly positive feedback in terms of the back office support that y'all provide, and access to some of the best products out there in the industry. So
Sure.
very excited about the partnership. We'll share more things about
Us
that
too.
in the next in the time ahead. But as we round out this interview, why don't we? There's a few questions I wanted to ask you. First and foremost, is what is the kindest thing that someone has done for you?
Kindness. So it's a tough question. This is probably a more well, I'll just answer what actually comes to my mind. I would say what my wife does for me in general is like one of the kindest things. So I don't know that I can think of a specific thing, but she's just been I think anytime you're building an organization, there's a lot that goes into doing that and doing it well. And she's just been kind of a bedrock for our family throughout all of that. So just knowing that she's got things kind of taken care of at home in a way, I guess. I don't even know if that's the right way to say it, but just I think, and has always been supportive of the things that I've wanted to do. And even if she's more of a realist than I am, I think she gives me kind of that freedom to go chase some of these crazy things, but then make sure that our family runs right, and that I'm not getting out of whack and things there too. So just the way I think she has helped us navigate the growth of all this, and our family has been probably the kindest thing.
That's beautiful. Obviously, you two are very complementary, so it's a
Yeah.
great partnership.
And I'm gonna have to send her this podcast now. So make sure you send it to me when we're done.
Absolutely. Next question is, when do you believe differently now than you believed as your 20-year-old self?
I might steal some of these questions from my podcast. Well, I would say so. If you were to go back to when I was 20 years old, I was probably a sophomore or junior in college. Kind of back to what I said, first person in my family to go to college. Didn't grow up with money, didn't know much about it. So maybe one thing for sure, I don't know that I would have believed back then that anybody could be successful. Like I thought there were certain, like, you had to come from a certain background. Like I figured I would do okay, but I don't think I envisioned being able to achieve maybe what I've achieved today. I think the more I've been around and met other successful people, I've seen that success is really available to anyone. Just not a lot of people are willing to do the things it takes to be successful and put the work in, and constantly focus on growing, personally. So that would probably be a big one. I don't know if you would have told me like you would achieve this, or like anybody can be successful, that I would have completely believed that. But I think now I do believe that. It doesn't mean that it's not easier for some people, right? That certain people are born with advantages. There's no question about that. But I've met so many people that are born with zero advantages, short of being born in this country, which is still the greatest advantage that anybody can be given, maybe in the history of the world. Short of that, like I've just met a lot of successful people that didn't, come from a background of success, go to an Ivy League college, some of those things. So that would be one. The other, and I would say this is maybe much more specific to this industry. My what led me into financial services, I think maybe you've heard this story before, but my junior year of college, my grandma declared bankruptcy, and she had owned this small cafe in the town I grew up in. Her and my grandpa got divorced when I was in fifth or sixth grade, and so my grandma was 64 years old at the time. divorced, bankrupt, sole source of income been taken away from her. And that's what sent me on a path to learn more about money. I just didn't know much about it. So I went and got a job that summer at a bank here in town, worked at a bank my senior year full time, and then got into this industry. And I think the one thing that I've seen and I've really learned is that being a financial advisor is one of the most admirable and noble professions that is out there if it's done well. There's also the people that take complete advantage of this industry and the income that you can make and take advantage of their clients or the people they're supposed to serve. But on the flip side, man, I've also seen the people who do it well and the impact you can have, and especially the advisors that both of us serve tend to work with people who are in retirement. You're likely going to be the person that they call when their spouse dies. Think about that. Like that outside of maybe, their pastor or someone, if they have a faith, like, or their doctor, you're probably going to be one of the first people they call. Like you're there helping them plan. One of our advisors literally just shared this story. And it was so powerful. Like one of his clients walked in, he's like, I didn't even recognize him because he had got cancer. And just, I was helping them just make sure that we had everything taken care of. So his spouse was going to be fine, so you're just there and done the right way. You give people this freedom to not have to worry about their money in retirement, which I think is really cool. It allows them to go do other things, but then you're also able to help them navigate just some of these, crazy life situations that they're going to deal with. And so I hope everyone, I know not every person takes this industry as serious as they should, but that's one of the things that I hope we can do is just really repaint the image of a financial advisor, and being one is noble and admirable, and you can have a huge impact on people. And that's something I didn't even know what a financial advisor was when I was 20 years old, so just being around that now, it's one of the other big things that I think is just a realization.
That's really good. I'm sure our audience is going to get a lot of value out of
I
that
hope so.
answer. Yeah. And so the last question, what important subject do you believe is missing in school that should be taught today?
Well, I mean, I could probably give you a few. I think the easy answer would be for me to say, financial literacy, financial education would seem on a point with what I do today. But this one is just, it's been super top of mind with the time that I've spent around John Maxwell this year. And he's actually started this I Lead program. They're actually doing a lot of this work in other countries, so Dominican Republic and countries like that, but starting to get some of it in schools here. And it's values. And what he has said, what he's built this entire kind of curriculum around is teaching values again. And I think we've gotten so far away from things like, teaching kids what it means to be honest or to have integrity or to, have determination and some of those things. I would say, that probably more than anything else is what I see missing in a lot of schools today, is that we're not teaching kids the values. And typically those values that you would teach are the things that are the foundation for success in everything else that you do, whether it's, financial, whether it's relationships, as an employee, an employer, a leader. So I think that's one that we really are going to have to get back to teaching in a much better way.
That's fantastic. Do you have a resource that you would mention
Yeah,
regarding
so
values?
I can't think of the exact website, but John Maxwell does have a great resource and curriculum built out around this. In fact, from being at that event, I'm trying to get it installed in a few of our schools here in Topeka, just because I think it would be a transformational thing.
That's really good. I appreciate you sharing that because, I mean, being a new dad, that's something I've been really taking some inventory. What are our values? And have I actually
Yeah,
like distilled them down, written them down? And I do definitely want to make that a big part as I raise my son. So we're
yeah.
out of time. And first of all, thank you, Cody, for going down this interview path with me. I'm very appreciative, and you're very generous. And that there's some people that are very what I consider to be deep wells, where you draw the bucket down into the well and the water always comes back. And there are some people, you draw the bucket down and after a couple buckets, it's empty. You and I could be jamming out for many, many hours and I could always derive value from conversations from you. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you. I appreciate you saying that.
It's interesting because, what we talked about had, some to do with financial advising in our industry, but had a lot more to do with just being a human and what it takes to connect with one another. And how do we navigate some of the challenges we're dealing with, whether it be mental health and extending grace to one another, and how do we actually achieve success and how to support one another in that. And I really appreciate it. It's been very inspiring. And I certainly hope, and I'm sure and confident that the listeners today will be getting as much value as I did. So I'll make sure to put the show notes. I've been taking notes during this conversation. But as we close it out, was there any last remarks or things you want to share with the folks before we sign off today, Cody?
Not so much. Well, first, I would say congrats on finally, kind of relaunch. I know you did this years ago, but like really getting serious about doing this again, because I do think you have a lot of value that you can share with other people. So congrats on launching it. In the final, and I know this is going to trend towards you'll have more advisors listening to this, but just being really good at what you do, I think is important now more than ever. I think what we need are great leaders right now in like every aspect of our society. So just committing to being a great leader for your clients, for your team is really, really important. I think that's how we're going to kind of change maybe some of the things that are going on right now in our country.
That's great. Well, on that note, we're going to go ahead and end our first episode of Advisors of Influence. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Thanks again, Cody, for joining us today. I certainly appreciate it. Hopefully we'll have you in a future interview in the months to come. Otherwise, everyone have a wonderful holiday and look forward to having the most prosperous and abundant 2022. Thanks. Bye for now.
Thanks for joining us. Before you forget, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and let us know what you think by leaving us an honest review. If there's any other topics or guests you'd like on the show, feel free to let me know. Want to learn more about how to grow a financial practice with just an internet connection and a cell phone? Visit us at advisorinternetmarketing.com/grow to learn more. Again, that's advisorinternetmarketing.com/grow. That's all for now. We'll see you next time.